Hi, this is Alex Traiman, Jerusalem Bureau Chief with Jewish News Syndicate, and I'm here with Dr. Eran Lerman, who is the Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Last week on August 4th, a massive explosion rocked the port of Beirut, killing well over 100, injuring thousands, and leaving potentially hundreds of thousands homeless. And I think the question is, how much does Israel know about the cause of the Lebanon blast?
Well, we are fairly certain that the story about the ammonium nitrate in itself is straightforward. There was a huge amount of ammonium nitrate there. It's been traced. Historically, people know who brought it and why it was left there. The question is, first of all, what were the initial blasts coming from? Because before it exploded, there was already a huge column of smoke and things were blowing up there. So that could have been ammunition dump. Moreover, why was nothing ever done to remove the ammonium nitrate from the port? And here, people are asking questions because historically, Hezbollah has been known to provide its cells abroad with ammonium nitrate as an explosive. There was a cell uncovered in Cyprus. There were people arrested in London. There were similar arrests in Germany. And of course, people do know that ammonium nitrate has been used in terror attacks. This was Timothy McVeigh's material when he blew up the federal building in Oklahoma. And when the cell was uncovered in Cyprus, and I was still in the government briefing foreign guests and diplomats, I said, I doubt if Hezbollah intended this in order to, for agricultural purposes in Cyprus.
Right.
So here certain questions arise. The Lebanese people, many people in Lebanon seem to think that Hezbollah is in some way implicated. Moreover, Hezbollah is the government, really. It's the dominant element in the Lebanese government in recent years. So the responsibility for gross negligence and for corruption and for everything that's gone wrong in Lebanon in the last few years now falls squarely on Hassan Nasrallah's shoulders.
Is there any way to remove Hezbollah's influence from the government of Lebanon? And is there any way to disarm all of Hezbollah's stockpiles?
Well, no. The honest answer is to both is not in the immediate or intermediate future. This is a huge organization, well armed, much stronger than the Lebanese government. Last time they actually had a conflict, by the way, over the control of Beirut airport and also over the control of the communication networks in Lebanon. Back in May 2008, 2 years after the Second Lebanon War, they beat the Lebanese government hands down, basically ground them to dust, Hezbollah, and nobody ever challenged them since. So that's the short and simple answer. Then comes the more hopeful note amidst what is happening now. Yes, Hezbollah is stronger than the military, but it's not stronger than the Lebanese people as a collective. Now, is there a Lebanese people? Or are they just clans organized by sectorial interests? Well, there's not a singular answer to this. Lebanon is a very strange place. It is dominated by sectorial and sectarian interests, but there still is something that can be described as a Lebanese identity. It was enough to have the Syrians driven out in 2005 after Hezbollah assassinated Hariri. So there was a burst of anger backed by the international community, UN Security Council Resolution 1551, etc. And the result was that the Syrians had to leave. Will Hezbollah be facing greater and greater pressure from the Lebanese people to stop abusing their country for purposes which are not Lebanese, for purposes which are essentially Iranian? I believe this can happen. I believe that Hassan Nasrallah now has to be very, very careful not to be seen by the great majority of Lebanese, maybe even quite a number of Lebanese Shia, as the obedient servant of a foreign interest, namely Iran. And this is a constraint that can work in Israel's favor.
Now, Hezbollah is believed to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at Israel of varying degrees of sophistication with precision targeting. What can be done to remove those stockpiles? How do we get rid of the threat on Israel's northern border?
Well, it reminds me of a famous story that Kissinger likes to tell. He once asked General de Gaulle, how would he deal with German dominance in Europe? And de Gaulle rose to the full length of his frame and said, par la guerre. There is no other way but war to destroy Hezbollah's infrastructure in Lebanon. However, Israel is doing something short of war to make sure that some of that sophistication that you mentioned does not fully get into Hezbollah's hands. And this has come to be called, it's a phrase I believe that we owe to former Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot, called the CBW in English, or MABAM in Hebrew, the campaign between the wars. It's not war, it's not peace either. It's a continuous effort to degrade the capacity of Iran to move significant elements of weaponry and the technology necessary for precision to Hezbollah in Lebanon, as well as to prevent Iran from taking hold in Syria itself. And this is an ongoing effort. Israel never ever owned up to the full range of operations. There were a few that were mentioned openly because we were targeting people who were targeting us. But the aggregate is occasionally mentioned by Israeli speakers. And we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of operations in the last few years.
Now, the international community got to see what happens very clearly when weapons, munitions, and explosive materials end up in the hands of irresponsible actors. Right after the blast, Israel offered humanitarian aid to Lebanon. Is that what Israel should be doing, or should they be making the case of exactly how much stockpile of weapons Hezbollah has and try to empower or force the international community to put additional pressure on Hezbollah?
They're not contradictory. The humanitarian impulse is, first of all, honorable. I actually stand with it. I would support the decision of the mayor of Tel Aviv to send a signal to the Lebanese people as such, that we are not their enemy. Mind you, this flag was for years the flag of our allies in Lebanon, the Lebanese flag, the Lebanese forces. So we are not their enemy. And because we are not their enemy, and because France is not their enemy, we are entitled to actually ask some questions, directly or indirectly, about the role of Hezbollah in the current misery of the Lebanese people. So these two impulses complement each other. They don't contradict each other. Now, the French are not going to be directly confrontational with Hezbollah because that's not going to work. But if they manage to force the Lebanese to go through deep structural reforms in order to be eligible for the kind of bailout without which Lebanon will simply go down the drain, if they are able to demand such reforms, these reforms in and of themselves will limit Hezbollah's room for maneuver in Lebanon. So we need to be patient. This is not going to happen overnight, but I think we have, if we act wisely, and by the way, in close coordination with the French, with whom we have now a commonality of interest on both fronts, in Lebanon and in the Mediterranean, over the Turkish ambitions in Libya and so on. France is very much at the same corner with us, Greece, Egypt. Then I think we have a fighting chance of turning things around in Lebanon over time.
Dr. Eran Lerman, thank you very much.
You're welcome.